Buckle up, everyone, because this is going to be a long off season. Welcome, everybody, to JG9 News, where we talk all things NFL all the time. I'm Jaguars 9, representing the 904 from the 602, and today we are talking about Jaguars head coach Doug Pederson and his press conference the other day, where he went over how the season went, and he basically blamed injuries for why the Jaguars collapsed down the stretch. Seriously, the Jaguars went from 8-3 to 9-8. They had about a 99% chance of making the playoffs. They didn't, thanks to an epic collapse that will live on in NFL history. And Doug Pederson decided that injuries were a big part as to why it was the case. Not anything that he did or the coaching staff did. No, it was the injuries that played a major part in why this team fell apart over the final 6 games and went 1-5. Take a listen.
Gosh, you never know. You know, each year is different, right? Some years you have very few. Some years you have quite a few. And for us this year, it was quite a few. But it was the ones that, you know, guys were missing 4 games, right? The IR missing 4 games, and it disrupts a lot of things. Disrupts them individually. It could disrupt, you know, a unit. You know, in our case, potentially or particularly the offensive line. You know, with the amount of injury there, especially on the left side, guys that missed, Cam situation. You know, so it all can impact, you know, your football team.
Now, look, I'm not going to deny it. The Jaguars had some injuries. Obviously, Trevor Lawrence wasn't healthy for the final month of the season. Yeah, the Christian Kirk injury, he missed the entire month of December after the Bengals game, where he got hurt very early on there. Cam Robinson, the best player on the offensive line, he was on and off for the whole season. Jamal Agnew, he was hurt during the end of the season. Tyson Campbell was hurt for a good bit. Top 5 cornerback last year. He obviously was not fully healthy this year. Zay Jones was on and off this year. Devon Hamilton for the first 3 months of the year, he was out. So yes, the Jaguars did deal with some injuries. We all know that. But guess what? Every team deals with injuries. Every single team in this league deals with injuries. When you play a season this long and a sport like this, you're going to get hurt. No team survives an entire season without a single guy getting hurt. That's the way it is. That's the nature of the sport. And very rarely that can be used as an excuse. There are some times where I'll say, yes, it is absolutely an excuse. If you lose every single quarterback, if you're down to like practice squad guys, if you can't field a 53-man roster, yes, you can use that as an excuse. But 99% of the time, you cannot use that as an excuse. And the Jaguars, you cannot use that as an excuse. That's just the way it is. Look at the Cleveland Browns. They started 5 quarterbacks this year. 5 quarterbacks. And they're in the playoffs. They won 11 games. You're going to blame injuries when you got a team like the Cleveland Browns who won games despite all the injuries they've dealt with? Especially this year. The Jags are one of the lucky teams with injuries. The Jags are one of the lucky ones. Trevor Lawrence only missed 1 game. Look at how many teams missed their starting quarterback for an extended period of time. It seemed like this was the year that all the quarterbacks were dropping like flies. The Jags were one of the lucky ones. They only had to lose Trevor Lawrence for 1 game, and that was against the worst team in football in the Carolina Panthers. You can't blame injuries. You just can't. That is a loser's mentality, especially because you look at the final 6 games when you collapse. Guess who you played at quarterback? You played Jake Browning. Last time I checked, he's not the starting quarterback of the Bengals. That is Joe Burrow. You played Joe Flacco. Last time I checked, he's not the starting quarterback of the Browns. That is Deshaun Watson. And you played Ryan Tannehill week 18. Last time I checked, he's not the starting quarterback of the Titans. It's Will Levis. All of them you faced due to injuries. You went 0-3 against them, and you made them all look like world beaters. So explain that one. How are injuries an excuse for you, and yet it doesn't work the other way when you face all these backup quarterbacks that are in due to injuries and you don't beat them? The offensive line, you're going to blame the injuries on the offensive line? They were 31st in football last year, and they ranked 31st this year. What injuries? They looked exactly the same. The injuries are not an excuse for the offensive line play. They're just not. Blaming injuries is saying that a healthy team wins, and that is a telltale sign of complacency, that there's no accountability and self-reflection, and that it was external factors that did this team in. It is the same mindset that got us in this spot in the first place. It's the same mindset that got us in this spot with the drafting of luxury picks in day 2, not trying to sign anyone in free agency, not making any notable moves at the deadline outside of picking up a backup guard for the Minnesota Vikings, blaming injuries instead of blaming yourself and taking accountability. That is total nonsense. Injuries are not an excuse for giving Press Taylor play calling duties. They're not an excuse for the horrible play calls and decisions that you made throughout the season, like the Colts naked bootleg that got Trevor injured, like the Texans game, the end of the first half in that game, when you decided to call that pitch play at the 1 yard line, and same thing, calling the timeout at the very end of that game instead of having the Texans rush out for the 58-yard field goal, which, thank God, Amendola missed that one. They're not an excuse for the Ravens no-huddle play where you decided not to spike the ball and Trevor Lawrence ended up throwing a pass. So you called a play that didn't even go to the end zone. And it's not an excuse for the Titans' third down pass at the goal line down 28-20. None of those are injury-related. None of those can be used as an excuse. Injuries are not an excuse for poor play calls. They're not an excuse for missed gaps, missed tackles, for drop passes, for anything like that. Injuries are not an excuse for any of the mistakes that you made as a head coach. And this press conference was very concerning for a lot of reasons. We'll probably get to those in later videos, but this was one of the main reasons. The fact that Doug Pederson could just sit there and blame injuries for the reason that the Jags missed the playoffs, despite the fact that they had a starting quarterback that started 16 out of 17 games, and the one game he didn't start was against the worst team in football, despite the fact that this year it seemed like every single team was getting hurt, despite the fact that injuries are a part of the game. I find that shameful, just absolutely shameful. And I think this team is stuck in the mud. This team is absolutely stuck in the mud with Doug Pederson as the head coach. If he is going to have that little accountability, that little self-reflection, that little awareness to the situation, then we are completely screwed for this offseason, because in his eyes, based on what he said, if he's blaming injuries, nothing's going to change. There's going to be no improvement, and we're just going to run it back next year, and we'll see how that works out. My guess, it's not going to work out well. I can tell you that much. It's not going to work out well. But what do you guys think? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. If you like what you saw, be sure to like and subscribe. It helps the channel out a lot. And be sure to check out my main channel, Jaguars 9, where we talk all things NFL history all the time. Until next time, this is Jaguars 9 signing off. And as always, go Jags.